Oi, you. It's time for another episode of Dorothy and the Dealer. Let's tune into the conversation.
Hey.
Hey, Darren, how you
we are
going?
back with,
Dazzling
hey,
Darren.
we're back with Darren Hey. That was not planned. That was such a dad joke thing to say. It's so cool. I love speaking to you, Darren. Welcome back to Dorothy and the Dealer. We had a massively awesome response to your previous podcast with us, and this is today's chat is going to be a natural continuation of that. So thank you for coming back and sharing with us and spending your time sharing information with us.
My pleasure. I always love sharing with you guys.
That's cool. So for anybody who hasn't listened to the first one, we really talk a lot about in the one we did before, Darren, we speak a lot about your background and where you came from and how you got into everything that you do. But today what we wanted to do is we wanted just to dive deep into the rabbit hole about how our foods can connect us to our spirituality, our source, how using our diet and nature can help us to connect it.
But I think also what we can do now to start to edge people back towards that, to get away from these false foods and make it, because I know if Darren had his way, he would just put everybody on a fucking water diet for a month and then he would just make them all eat raw food. But we can't do that because that's just not possible. But I want to get into what are the little changes, subtle changes that people can make right now that can start to edge people towards that, take them back to that state of being live, as opposed to consuming foods that are so dead and not nutritious.
Yeah, so We'll absolutely come around. So we want to talk science today, and then we want to talk about practicality as well for everyday life. So where do you think we should start, Darren? What do you think is the best place to start?
Well, I think, maybe it's best to talk about what food is. And I do think that we touched it or touched on it in the last episode. But if we can jog people's memories, they're kind of like segues then into what are the best foods to eat.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to start it is to look at the fact that plants capture light energy, from the cosmos, inbound from the cosmos, from stellar bodies, from the stars, and in particular our sun. And that light is the energy which the plant then uses to join together different molecular, atomic and molecular structures from the earth, and uses that light energy to bind them together to build tissue structures. And that's what we are ultimately eating when we eat those tissue structures. The electrons which have been charged by the photons of light and released as we decompose those tissue structures into reinforming our own tissue structures, and therefore undergoing a process of regeneration when we eat the right types of foods. And we can take that even a layer deeper when we have a look at what is light itself. And light, in fact, is information. In scientific terms, energy and information are synonymous. When they study black holes and they study the quantum physics and dynamics of black holes, radiated bodies and non-radiated bodies and all this type of stuff, they see that the taking in of energy and the taking in of information and the releasing of energy and the releasing of information are basically the same thing. The structure of energy gives it its information. And so what utilizes information? It's consciousness. Consciousness is anything which generates, receives, and utilizes information.
So just let me ask a question there.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about information, we're saying information. And how this energy turns up in formation, just correct me if this is what we're saying or not, And then, so I know that you've spoke with me before about the formation of certain things will signal to you where the vitality and the energy is most going to be utilized within the human form. For example, if a person eats a walnut, there are certain, it's like nature is informing us based on the form of a certain fruit or vegetable or nut as to what part of the body gets the most amount of vitality from that formation or information. Is that true, or is that kind of nonsense?
That's definitely true. That has been verified by science and studies. I mean, in particular, the walnut, which looks like a brain, is one of the highest naturally occurring sources of glutamate. And glutamate is actually a neurotransmitter, or used and converted by the brain into a neurotransmitter. So with walnuts being the highest form or highest naturally occurring form of that, then it encourages the production of that neurotransmitter in the brain. Mm-hmm. And there'll be many other factors too. Celery is a well-known one because it has a high naturally occurring content of sodium, and the highest store of sodium in the body are the bones. So they're not mostly sodium, they just have the highest amount of sodium stored of any tissue structure in the body. So, and the celery, the stalk of celery looks like the long bones, mm-hmm. like the femur, mm-hmm. the tibia, and what have you. And there's many different other ones too. Blueberries, the blue color is significant of the higher elements of consciousness, mm-hmm. as opposed to the red color, which is significant of the lower elements of physicality. Mm-hmm. And the blueberry, they track the compounds in blueberries up into the brain, literally track them up into the brain.
Wow.
To have regenerative effects in the brain.
So is that just coincidence? Is that just coincidence? Or
no such thing as coincidence in a causal
right.
universe.
We know that.
So just so we give people the definition of coincidence is two things that come together to coincide. But people would be out there going, that's just a coincidence. And so it's not just it's not coincidence. It's actually nature's order to things. Is that what you're saying?
It is actually nature's order. It's information. Consciousness uses information, and consciousness is I want to give you another excellent example of the signature of nature too, by the way. Mm-hmm. But consciousness is characterized by awareness and by its creativity. Mm-hmm. And so awareness is derived by attention, the quality of attention or presence of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And creativity is an action of the intention of consciousness. So, but consciousness utilizes information in order to create. So it receives information, it is aware of through its attention, of the incoming stream of energy, which is information. And then it creates through intention a structure which is built of energy, and interacts with it. So, and that's the fundamental fabric of all existence, really. Mm-hmm. And so the deeper you go into that journey, which is what, I'm a study of esoterics and esoteric literature and lore and what have you. And ultimately that journey is going deeper and deeper into those layers and what it means. Mm-hmm. And so going back to that example that I wanted to give, the carrot, the carrot, when they slice the carrot, looks like the eye, and the carrot is full of beta carotene and other carotenoids, but beta carotene is known as provitamin A. So it's a precursor to vitamin A. It's converted in the body to vitamin A. And it's that vitamin A which is found in the retina at the back of the eye, because it's a antioxidant, particularly good for neutralizing the oxidative effects of harmful radiation. So we got a lot of radiation coming in through the eye and hitting the retina at the back of the eye there in the macula. And so the vitamin A has powerful transducing effects of that radiation and protecting the eye from harm. Now, something interesting that I have discovered in my own esoteric research was that powerful clairvoyants have seen that carrots actually have an activation on the what's known as the Arjuna Chakra, or the third eye, in the middle of the forehead there. And there's an activation they can see happens in that energy center when people eat carrots. And it's interesting that when you cut the carrot in half, you're only seeing one eye, you're not seeing two. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit of information that I found not so long ago. So we won't go down that rabbit hole.
No, that's fine. So then if we're ill, so let's say ill, and there's a certain part of the body is in a state of dis-ease, is the way to treat that based on the vegetable or the fruit that would be associated with that part of the body? Or is that just a primitive way to look at it?
Well, no, I think there's great relevance in that. Great relevance, but it's not the only factor. I mean, our ability to utilize life energy and to let that flow through us is not just dependent on the foods that we eat, although foods are a very large part of that, because they impart a lot of substance into our body, which can be the wrong substance if we're eating the wrong foods. Therefore they can put a great burden on our bodies. So food is a very large part of maintaining our health, for the reason that the things that we eat either lift us or they lower us by the quality of information that those foods contain, which is the same as the amount of life energy that they hold, or the order in the quality of the life energy that they hold, right? Information which is ordered, life energy which is ordered, which is the amount of beneficial nutrient that they contain. All those things are synonymous. So the consciousness, which your body is a field of consciousness, and if there is a disharmony in its function or an incongruence in its structure, that would be dis-ease. So that would be some type of deformation in the functions or activities of an organ, which could literally become a deformation in the organ itself, like a cyst, like cancer, like growth, like inflammation. Could be anything like that, because the field of consciousness has been altered from something which is in normal harmonic relationship with the forces around us, which sustain us, really, which influence us and sustain us or harm us.
So this is where I feel like it's important to sort of clarify. So we're nature, we're human beings. We have this. You're saying we're working in harmony with with what surrounds us, right? You're saying that food or light is information, and food that comes from a natural source is made up of light, right? It captures light, and its ability to capture light and structure itself in terms of its information. Then you said that consciousness, and we're conscious beings, but the food that we eating, because of its light and because of its structure, is also consciousness. And as a result of that, we become, so our attention, you said the attention, yes, so we become, this is us becoming what we're eating. So if we're eating whole foods, light foods, light from the light field, we have more awareness and creativity, which is what consciousness is, that you said earlier. Is that correct?
They're characteristics of consciousness.
Characteristics of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So we have more awareness, we have more creativity, so we become that which we consume, basically. So we are what we eat.
Yeah.
So based on that, then, like in an ideal world, like no other, I don't know, Western world factors, any of that other stuff. In an ideal world, as a human being, and if we were left to our own devices, what foods should we be consuming that are going to give us the best outcome for that? And based on what you're saying, that's whole foods, fruits and vegetables, right?
Yeah. So if everything was perfect, then, and I've looked at this for over 2 decades, and I've experimented on my own body, and the human body, the human frame, its physiology and digestive apparatus, our emotional, mental nature, all of that, we are without a doubt frugivorous.
Right.
Frugivorous. And
meaning
just explain what
fruit.
that means.
That means that we eat predominantly fruits and tender vegetables that are easily to digest.
Right.
So, and that would include nuts and seeds that are available, but you wouldn't eat too many of those either, because it's not easy to get a lot of them in one sitting. So,
excuse me.
That is our true nature. I mean, it conforms with our physiology, it conforms with our digestive apparatus, all the way from, our lips to our anus, the way our body is designed to deal with that and take it in. It conforms to our emotional and mental natures. And what we find, well, in the fact that you would rather sit under a beautiful fruit tree in nature and take a perfectly ripe, sun-ripened, naturally grown fruit that's sweet and tasty, and eat it and suck on its flesh, than you would, run another animal down in the field and sink your teeth around its trachea, strangle it, and tear a lump of its fur and dirt and gristle out, and then drink its blood and eat it, or entrails and all.
So you're saying that naturally we wouldn't be doing that. We're doing that in our current format, but naturally that's not what we're designed to do, and our bodies aren't designed for that yet. No.
And people can come up with all sorts of justifications, and the science has been distorted. Anyone who's been following science, especially over the last few years, seriously knows how science has been bought off by big industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the true history of humanity has not been told. And
we should get into that in another podcast as we go down the track. I think we will, won't we?
Well, it'd be an interesting one. There's probably many people more qualified than me to talk about it, but I've certainly had a good look into it. And you can put it to work in your own experience and just see what makes you feel better. However, to do it properly, you have to get past your own addictions, because once your addictions start to assert themselves, the mind can come up with any justification it needs just to keep them going. And I was one, because I was raised as a meat eater. I've eaten meat most of my life, and I enjoyed it. But there was a part of me that felt that the suffering of other creatures on my behalf, there was a part of me that found that difficult to deal with. And so I always wanted to give it up, but I always kept coming back to it. And it wasn't until I fasted myself down to a minimum weight. I took off about 12.5 kilos and rebuilt myself with plant-based foods only. And since that point, there's no craving whatsoever for animal products.
Right.
Yeah, definitely not meat. I think it was the hardest craving to get rid of wasn't meat, actually. It was dairy.
Yeah.
Really?
And cheese, yeah,
Cheese.
and cheese in particular. And so I had a couple of relapses on that, but never did it make me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The thought of eating it was always better than the actual experience of eating it, if you're really connected in with the subtle etheric or vital forces of your body, which I've spent more than 20 years connecting with and learning, and training my awareness to perceive them. And never can I say that it felt good in my body after having had it once I had done that clearing. But that was a 21-day fast on water alone, with a few days beforehand of juicing, and a few days after as well. So all in all, it was a 28-day cleanse, you might say. But and
how long ago was that,
21
Darren?
days. That was a few years ago now.
Right. So you haven't craved dairy since then?
No,
animal products.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
I look at meat, and I see it. People cooking it. Of course, I have no problems with all of that because there's no judgments in me because I had it for so long.
Yeah.
And I understand what a powerful addiction it is.
Yeah.
And I see people cooking it, and I smell it, and all the smells come back. I remember family barbecues and all this type of stuff. And there's this emotional thing which arises in you. But there's a very clear distinction between what is an emotional memory, right, and what is an actual, true physiological need of the body. Like I've worked with it. My practices have, created definite separation in those two things, so I can distinguish between them. Whereas most people, the emotional need and the emotional drive or desire arises in them, and they haven't separated that from a true physiological need. They haven't distinguished those two separate currents within them, so to speak.
Well,
they think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think when you're dealing with addiction, you're trying to break an addiction. Those cells are not getting the hit of those, those chemical reactions from the brain. How the body pulls together and sends that imagery to the frontal lobe of the brain to try to create a scenario so you can quench that addiction again. It's addictions are definitely problematic, especially addictions to processed foods and where we don't want to feel things. There's certain shit we don't want to feel. And when we're not wanting to feel things, we want to feel something else. Yeah, and it seems like they market, as I say all the time, they market to those fucking insecurities with foods. You if you eat this, you're not going to feel that. And then you're going to feel this. You're going to feel part of this. Drink the Coke. We know it's full of sugar. You're not going to feel these things. It's going to give you that quick hit. But at the same time, you're also going to feel like one of the gang. Because you're fucking drinking Coke and everybody else is drinking Coke and da 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 da. So it definitely feels like one of the things people have to confront is their addictions. But something else I was going to say was, it's important for people to understand that, we're talking to you, Darren, you're 20 years in, this is your field, this is your research, you threw yourself into it, you became your own test tube, you became your own guinea pig, and you've been working at this for a long time. And I think sometimes for people, it's like, fuck, man, in this lifetime, that would be impossible for me to be able to get that clean and that clear. And, so it seems like, I don't want people to think that it's not possible, you know. So what I want us to try to head towards, what are some of the little things we can start to do?
Well, I think before we get into that, though, I think we've got to understand what's happening, that we are addicted, and what the processed foods do, because I don't think we can dive into what people can do about it just yet until we get into what happens that we, apart from the emotional stuff and apart from the comfort and stuff in terms of the things that you're used to, you know, having the barbecues and stuff, and, you know, associating the smell with the feeling memory, of the family thing and whatever. I get all of that. But what is it that's going on for a human being that the addictions or that the foods, well, they're not using food in the way that it's intended? Does that make sense? That we've grown up with you know, being used to having processed stuff, being used to having the meats and dairy and stuff that, like you said, when you have come off it and then you get back on it again, you really recognize that you don't feel well as a result of that, right? So what is it that keeps us in this state of wanting to be like that and not going to something that is naturally occurring that we know is going to make us feel better?
Well, you know, it's consciousness is incredibly deep and complex, isn't it? And there's so many different facets to it. But the Buddha, whose teaching I highly, highly respect, basically boiled it down to sensation and our desire to feel certain sensations and our desire to not feel other sensations. So it basically came down to desire and fear, or craving and aversion,
right.
we called it.
Yep.
So we crave certain sensations because they enable us to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
And then we steer ourselves away, you know, avert ourselves from other sensations because they make us feel uncomfortable. So the good sensations aggrandize our sense of well-being, at least superficially, and the uncomfortable sensations, you know, damage our sense of well-being. So they, you know, and we, of course, we connect our perception of our well-being to our identity, you know, and how well we're doing in life and how well we're meeting life and how are other people going to perceive us and all this type of stuff. So it's all tied in with our egoic identity in the end. So we are unconscious mostly to the sensations which our consciousness is seeking out again and again and again and again, or avoiding again and again and again and again. Right. And so we know through our personal development work that you know, there are some actions that while they might, you know, be pleasurable for us, we know they're actually harmful for us. Right? And we know that there are some activities which, even though they might bring up a lot of fear and discomfort, are actually beneficial for us to do. So that's the layer of the higher layer of consciousness, you know, our mental nature, which is superimposed on top of our lower vital nature, which directs itself through pleasure and pain. So anything which is pleasurable tends towards the survival of the organism. Anything which is painful tends towards its destruction. That's purely on a level of sensation.
Yeah.
But we have an astral nature which plants don't have. And our astral nature is more developed than those of the animals that have started to develop a brain. And so we have a layer of complexity that we are now, you know, the evolution of consciousness, which is moving through, you know, if we look at things holistically, consciousness, its journey, which is moving through now the human form and human frame, which we are, is learning how to deal with that extra layer on top of the purely vital layer, which simply
Right.
steers itself through pleasure and pain and says, well, this is good for me and this is bad for me.
Yeah.
The higher mental nature which we have is now able to distinguish between those activities which might be uncomfortable but serve our self-preservation and serve our evolution and unfoldment, and those activities which might be pleasurable but don't serve our evolution and don't serve our unfoldment.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, drinking a Coke superficially is pleasurable, at least, right? You get a zing from the caffeine and from the sugar. So, you know, and it makes us feel good. It distracts us from whatever it is that we're feeling bad about. All right. So that's a superficial pleasure. It's a false joy, as Dr. Herbert Shelton would say. And his quote was, false joys shorten life and impair health at the same time that they rob us of our power to enjoy.
Right.
Because they damage the expression of the life force. So ultimately it's destroying our ability to actually feel. And so, you know, those things might pleasure us superficially, but if we actually truly connect in deeply with the life forces within us, so we've cleared away a lot of the mental, emotional obstruction and a lot of the physiological toxemia that we carry, so that we can feel more congruently and more accurately, then you'd know as soon as you had that Coke, you'd feel the harm that it causes inside of you. Right? So we actually do become congruent again at a certain point when the higher mental layer, so the astral nature of us, the higher level of consciousness of us, becomes congruent with the life forces within us and the physical body itself. They should be congruent.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
and
that's
so
very important.
We know too that those activities in consciousness, so which we're afraid of and which are really challenging to us, if we and so we're afraid of them, they make us feel uncomfortable, they make us contract, but we know that that's not really that activity that's doing that. It's some preconceived idea or perception that we're holding around that activity, really, because the activity itself is neither good nor bad. It's neutral, but we're attaching some story to the activity that makes us feel uncomfortable, and that would cause us to avert ourselves away, you know, from owning our shit and doing the stuff that we need to do. Because when we actually do that activity and face up and own up to it and complete it, we know how liberated and good that we feel. Right? So that's consciousness becoming congruent again. So it's just that our mental, emotional natures, which by their very nature are more abstract, you know, or we have abstracted them from the laws of the vital processes within our body and the laws that govern physiology and our physical nature. Because we have abstracted our consciousness from those laws, we have become incongruent with nature and incongruent with those laws. And that is what creates disease. That is what creates destruction. That is what creates war and poverty and mayhem and disharmony within not only human society, but within all the different strata of nature that we interact with. You know, that destruction bleeds into all of those areas because we are incongruent with those laws.
So this is why I love what you do. Basically, you're saying that our let me see if I can clarify this. You know, in the work that we do, we work with people about sorting out what's going on in terms of their mindset, in terms of what's happened to them, in terms of getting clear with their lives at some level, right? In doing that, that's how we approach assisting people. What you're saying is that in doing it, you can use nature to do exactly the same thing, right? In a different way, or using a different avenue. What I mean
nature
by
is
that,
the perfect blueprint.
Right. So if you were to use and eat whole foods, right, full of light and information and consciousness, the stuff and all the shit that would come up for you as a result of you doing that is the stuff to know that you've actually got to work on next, because the reason that you're leaning towards eating that piece of meat or that cake or drinking the alcohol or having the coffee is because of some other mental, emotional thing that's happened, because your true nature doesn't require you to do that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So that, I feel like, and the reason I can say this as well is because you and I have worked together for a long time. Like we spent 18 months where I was doing raw vegan diet, and I was experiencing through my food. I was on the phone to Darren a lot, crying over the phone, basically saying, I can't deal with this. This is full on. It's all this stuff is coming up. But all the stuff that was coming up, it was being allowed to come up. And because I have a way to be able to handle the emotional aspect of it, it helped. But it was allowed to come up because I was taken off all of my addictions, taken off all of the things that were going to get me by in my perception every single day, whether that was coffee, whatever it was that was going to get me by. So I really love that, because it's all about the congruency between the physical and the emotional. You also said there, you've got to clear out your mental and emotional distractions. Yeah.
So really just in terms of a person doing that, do you think it's possible to happen within a lifetime?
Yes. Yeah, because there's plenty of people who have done it. It really depends on, and I can see that I've got the sun setting.
I love it.
There.
I love it. I'm just about to take a photo of it.
All right. Because people have done it. It really depends on the will of the individual, because our addiction to, it's not just, it's sensation ultimately, but it's imagery too. We hold within our mind images of who we believe ourselves to be. And part of our egoic structure is the different things that we have attached to our structure that we believe to be part of us, or aggrandizes us, so builds us up, within our own mind, how we want to be perceived. And so it's not just becoming aware of the sensation as it occurs in your body, or the driver as it occurs in your body, but it's also starting to deconstruct the images that we hold around ourselves,
about who we are,
and letting them go so that we can actually evolve into something more. And this is not to say that you lose family or you lose friends. Sometimes that does happen if they're fundamentally not congruent with your direction, but it's just like they take on, they're not the primary driving force anymore, right? These external factors aren't the primary driving forces of your life. What it does, it starts to connect you with your own inner core, your own spirit core, which we'd call the ego with a capital E, or the higher self. So your divine core. So you start to connect in with that as you start to release any identity with all these other things. And all these other things are basically images which we hold within our mind, which is a vast field, the quantum field, and periodically flow through. And when they flow through, those images, these thoughts flow through our mind, they generate sensations, and we perform actions that give them validity, and that basically gives them energy. Like when we perform an action around a certain thought form, we are literally imbuing it with life energy, and so those thought forms persist, and they become they become stronger, and they literally cause you to feed them.
Yes.
With more energy, with more attention.
Can I ask, is craving food then, or specific foods, related to that as well? Like you're thinking about things?
Yeah, it's an astral form, which is a mental form, right? Mental emotional form, imbued with life energy, like vital energy. Literally, we have an etheric vital layer, which is the layer closest to our body.
But if it's true, then why can't I just? So yeah, I agree with you. But if I'm
literally
craving,
a life form.
So if I'm right, the craving does.
Yeah, it in effect is you could pass it out from who you really are as a packet, as an astral packet imbued with life force energy, which is attached to your field,
right,
and which needs to be fed continuously.
Right, got it.
Therefore, life force energy is not biased. It will give form to anything that we're focusing on. I think that's an important thing for people to understand.
Yes.
It doesn't sit back and go, oh, fuck, no, I won't. No, we can't do that. No. I understand that you're seeing that, you're visualizing that, but I can't give that any energy. It's not biased. It'll create anything that we want. So that's why freedom
including
of choice.
Destructivity. Yeah,
including destructivity. Because in its understanding, everything is perfect no matter what it is. And it's all just part of us learning about those parts of ourselves.
Yeah, it's directed by consciousness. So when you're unconscious, you engage in destructive activities and you feed it with life force. So you create destruction. Yeah.
So I just want to clarify. So if I'm craving chocolate or I'm craving coffee, what? So tell me about that. What's happening then?
So it's it's not because your body needs it.
It's because my thinking creates that part, gives it life energy that wants it, but that's not my true nature. If I'm creating something or I'm craving something that is in its natural form, like an apple or celery, then is that a different thing?
Yes, because when you see the apple or the celery, when you smell it and when you taste it, there will be this fundamental physiological, like a vibration that occurs within you, which is a deep-seated a feeling of well-being that occurs when you have it. It tastes good in your mouth and it feels good in your mouth, right? Now, anything that is in its natural form that doesn't pass that test, your body does not want. Because I've done this test many times with all sorts of different natural substances, including meat.
Yeah.
And the fact is that when my body does want meat, it will eat it raw.
Yeah.
And it will relish it. Right? It will relish it. And if your body wants dairy, and I don't recommend sweet dairy anyway. If your body does truly want dairy, then you could ferment milk, and you could get a soft cheese from it. But
so don't buy choc milk from the base.
No, exactly. But it's rare once you get past your addictions. I'd be very surprised if your body does crave milk.
Right. Yeah.
Or because it comes from another species. I mean, that in itself isn't natural, and 100%. Really we only crave those things. We crave animal products when we are not properly nourished.
Right.
And so the craving, our need to eat animal products has arisen because the lifestyle of humans, human settlements, human habitation, different parts of the earth have required that we consume it in order to be properly nourished, or sufficiently nourished, I should say. But there are better things to have than the animal products. And you won't know this until you start looking at how our activities structure our higher subtle bodies of consciousness. Right? It's when you start to get into that type of knowledge that things really start becoming clear.
Mm-hmm.
That we can even just do a thought experiment on what do you imagine a wise and benevolent society. What do you imagine the activities of a wise and benevolent society would be? Human society, empowered human race. Would we be preying on the lives of other creatures to consume them? Drink their blood, eat their flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind to other life forms to do that? Is it beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
It's neither kind nor beautiful, and that in itself, you can get lost in bought and paid for false science and come up with all sorts of reasons why the idea of creating society based on kindness and beauty alone isn't supported by the science, because science says we must eat meat, but there's plenty of science which says we don't need to.
Okay, so now that we've talked about that and the addictions and stuff, can we talk about these fad diets, what people can actually do on a day-to-day basis based on what we've just discussed and what we've just shared to help them to get closer to having a higher conscious awareness of their food intake or their energy intake? And if you can maybe speak to the diet, the different types of fad diet things and why those sorts of things don't or do work. I don't know if you can just speak to any of that.
Well, this is the thing about consciousness, is that because the activity of consciousness brings energy, attention and intention focus energy. So if you're convinced of something, then you could very well achieve, look at faith healing, for instance. Faith healing occurs because people are unequivocally convinced. And so they literally, there's literally a restructuring of subtle bodies that occurs through that alone. That can be of benefit, and it can also be of detriment to people if they aren't aware of the unconscious structures within themselves that created that condition in the first place. It just recurs,
Mm-hmm.
So but the activity of the life force works by certain laws, and not the least of which is the fact that the amount of power available determines the success of the work the life force has to do. So you can modify your diet in certain ways and alleviate a lot of stress already on the body and achieve good effects, even though the diet you might be following isn't optimal.
Mm-hmm.
It's enough for you to achieve healing. So that, it could just be that alone. In fact, often it usually is.
So you're saying any modification is better than nothing?
Yes, particularly when you start to move more towards whole foods. Anyone who moves towards whole foods, whether it's meat, whether it's animal products, whether it's grains, whether it's legumes, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruits, right? Anyone who moves towards a whole foods diet, whether it's cooked or whether it's raw, are going to achieve benefits, because you're taking away a lot of the entropic processes which have occurred through the processing.
Right.
So entropy sets in, obviously, the further down the processing rabbit hole you go. And of course, with the processing, you take out the living elements, you take out the light, you take out the electrons, you deplete the living water, you denature the proteins, and you denature the carbohydrates. All these things occur, which put a burden on the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so the body doesn't get properly nourished, and it gets filled up with all this waste matter. right? So, foods which have been very denatured actually increase entropy within the body rather than importing negentropy, which is the offsetting of entropy.
So
right?
simplifying that, you're saying anything that has, the more processed it is, the less life force it has. The less life force it has, the more problematic it's going to be in the human form. So you're saying that...
Well, the less life force in the food, the more life force your body must use to utilize it.
Oh, okay, got it.
You've got to take the things that you intake, that you imbibe, have to be raised to the level of organization, right? The level of order of your own body.
Right, got it.
So if we have denatured them below that level of organization, below the level of order of the body, by denaturing the information within it,
right?
We must impart our own forces into that before it can even become a part of us. It can't join with us. Right?
I like that. I think that's really
quite
cool.
Literally, we are, every time we do that, we are lowering the overall potential of our bodies.
I really like
which is
that.
why we only get out. We're happy. We think we're doing well if we get out 80 years. We think we're doing exceptionally well if we get out 90 years and anything over that. But a lot of people get out far less. So the idea is that anything that you do, the information that you take in, should be restructuring and reordering and increasing the order within the field of consciousness that you are, not decreasing it, making it more coherent, not less coherent.
I really like that. That reminds me of our wealth principles thing. So in our money stuff, right, if we want to give out, we give to a higher ordered system, because at that higher ordered system, it's going to know how to structure the finances. If you give to a lower ordered system, it will diminish the energy and the finances based on the lower ordered system. Basically, what you're saying is exactly the same thing in terms of the physical body. Whatever we can do to take in information of a higher order, we step up to that order, that higher level of order. If we take in information of a lower order, we deplete ourselves to the level of that order. So basically what you're saying then is that any movement, even if somebody's drinking 5 cups of coffee a day, anything that reduces that amount takes away step by step the amount of life force we need to use to help break that food or drink into something that we can actually use as a part of our life force. So any change that we make towards more whole foods or less processed foods is going to be beneficial to us.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter. So people don't have to turn vegan overnight. They don't have to eat fully raw foods overnight. It's just being consciously aware of any shift that you can make on a day-to-day basis and using, and I feel like another thing that we've got from this whole episode as well is the fact that it's our mental and emotional self that causes some of those addictions. It's not just that's the driving force. That's the driving force, right?
It pretty much just is the mental emotional self that hijacks the vital forces within us, because the purpose of the soul, if you want to call it that, coming into form is to feel, is to experience. And so the images that it contains, that it holds, hijacks the vital nature, right? The life forces of the being, right? It hijacks them, it co-opts them into the experience that it wants. And the experience that it wants is a construct of the mental imagery that it holds around itself.
So it wants to see, it wants this to give it this idea of itself. It wants to, okay, I get it. That's really cool. I really like
that. And the feelings just reinforce it.
It's nicely simplified, isn't it?
I think so.
It's the most subtle of changes, because people, what can be problematic and counterproductive is people think the changes have to be so fucking dramatic and have to be so huge and have to be so much and have to be, and it's going to drag up all this stuff and that, and it's not. It's just do it subtly, daily, something simple, you know, start to move back to a cleaner, smarter, healthier way of eating. And it doesn't mean that, you know, you have to chop all your addictions out tomorrow. It's
every part of that is a step towards consciousness, is a step towards light.
You're changing, you're transforming consciousness. Yeah. High quality food, I call it.
Well, I love that. I think that's a really good way to finish this up. I think that was awesome. That was that tied it in nicely. I know we go down the rabbit hole a little bit, and when you talk about entropy and stuff, I know that may freak people out, but you know, I think simplified, I think that's really important. The closer we can get to ingesting light and consciousness, and the less life force we have to use to break down these things that we put inside of ourselves, the more life force energy we have to go and live our best lives, you know, to live our lives inspired, like we would talk about, you know.
Yeah, I think even as well, like simple things like if people cook their vegetables, right? But if you're going to cook your vegetables, why not do just a small part of them raw and a small part of them cooked? Do you know what I mean? Why not, if you're going to drink water, why not drink clean water as opposed to water that has fluorides and da-da-da-da? You know, just the simplest of things. If it's going to rain, just put the glass outside. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. And eat lots of greens.
And lots of greens.
Lots of greens.
Increase the amount of greens you have in your diet.
Yeah. That's really good. Darren, I really appreciate that. That was really good. We have got so much to talk about. We will say goodbye for now, and then we will come back and talk to you on another podcast, because we can go down. So I think what we talked about today was a lot about how we can construct and what we can do to help, build our nature, and how we can step up that way. I think what we're going to do next time is talk a little bit about what happens that destructs that, like, and what impact certain things have on destructuring our nature, like medications and things like that. And I know you can go down the rabbit hole with that, and I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with you.
Let's talk that.
Thanks, Darren. We really appreciate that. Speak soon.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
If you found this information inspiring, make sure you subscribe and tune in to the next Dorothy and the Dealer podcast.